Hi, welcome back. If you've watched the last video, we're on to task 2. We're studying in Terrace. You can find a link to the poem in the description. If you attend the school I attend, Google Classroom's your place. And the workpack that I refer to, again, if you're in my school, you've got that on Google Classroom. If not, follow the link to my test shop. Don't be frightened by the fact it says shop. The download is free. Okay, just do me a favour and subscribe here and smash that like button, as my son's YouTubers say. But all these resources are there, so this will just kind of help support your journey through those things. So yesterday we had a little look at title, very first look at the title of the poem In Oak Terrace by Tony Connor. We also had a look at what happens in the poem. Who is this about? Who's the kind of character, the persona we call them in poems? Who's the persona here? It's not the poet. It's an old woman. He's observing her. And then we had a little look at some of the things it made us think and feel as we read the events, the things, the actions that she does that night, and then how does it make me feel? And we wrapped up with the attitudes that the poet's attitude seems to be that old age is a lonely thing. Old age is a time when, you know, you have to face the horrors of what happened to you throughout your life. And we will learn here, for example, the death of a child, the descent into madness by her brother. So we've got those three things nicely wrapped up. And in the first 5 minutes of an exam, if I was sitting the AQA literature exam, in that first 5 minutes, I've gone in, I've found out about title, narrative, attitudes, those first attitudes, and I've spent 5 minutes just writing those up. Okay, so I'm already gaining some really fabulous marks. The next place to go, we always have a look at language. Now, let's be realistic. I've got half an hour to read, comprehend, and produce a write-up of this poem. I'm not going to be able to write about everything, and I wouldn't want to, because actually what I want to do is to go and find those pieces of evidence where I am responding most strongly. I know that students that I teach are really fabulous at finding those sparkly pop-out moments in poems, and the reason they're good at doing it is because the poet has done their job. The poet has drawn our attention to images, sounds, beliefs by using language which is just slightly heightened, slightly modified, slightly more playful, slightly more ambiguous, slightly more loaded with language than we would use in our everyday conversations. Okay, so we're going to be really, really good at finding those. Poets always make a journey. Poets who get published partly on the basis that they take an idea at the beginning of the poem, they establish it, they set it up, they develop it in the middle. Something has changed, something has moved on, we're elsewhere, we're in a different belief, for example, and by the end we've moved even further along, down that rabbit hole, along that sea, okay, down that path, lifted up into the sky, whatever the journey is, okay, that metaphorical inner journey it could be. So I would be looking to choose language beginning, middle, end. This poem's 4 stanzas long. So what I could do is say I'm going to take a couple from each stanza, for example, if the stanzas are worth that. But I'm certainly not going to try and take everything. I'm going to look for the bits that are those pop-out bits on the page. Now, our ears are very good at hearing the most sparkly bits of language, the most noteworthy bits. But in an exam, obviously, we can't read it out loud to ourselves. So we have to be very good at developing our inner voice, our inner reading voice, reading to ourselves, and our inner ear, noticing the rhymes, why is that adjective there? It doesn't need an adjective there. They've put an adjective in there. That adjective is interesting. Okay, so let's go and have a look at how that works. I'm going to talk you through how I might do it and leave some room for you to have some practice too. Okay, so let's have a look at that poem. Remember, stanza 1, I'm going to be looking for what I believe is an interesting choice. I'm not thinking about myself so much, but why did that get chosen? What does that bring to this poem? Okay, so old and alone, she sits at nights nodding before the television. I liked nodding because it doesn't say nodding off before the television, which would strictly be the suggestion that she's nodding off to sleep, that she's sleeping and the television is lulling her into sleep. So it doesn't say nodding off, but that idea of nodding. So maybe not just the idea of nodding off and being sleepy in front of the TV at night, but also kind of nodding along to what she's seeing. Music, the news, a quiz program. Yeah, she's communicating, isn't she, with that TV, because there isn't other human communication in the room with her. Okay, so I'm interested in that word nodding, and it's an ing word. So ing words are going to be verbs, aren't they? It's an action here as well, so it's dynamic. So I either say the verb nodding or the dynamic verb nodding. Okay, and then I unpack that for the examiner. So as I'm going along and I'm underlining, just at this moment in time, I've all those thoughts of ping, 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 ping around my brain, but I just note down falling asleep, agreeing, because those will re-trigger those thoughts when I come back. And I might put the letter V. I have a dog excavating my sofa. This is why I go through sofas like nobody's business. Jibbo, stop it, hey? Or if I want to show the examiner that I really understand that verbs come in certain categories, I will put DV for dynamic verb. Okay, so I'm loaded up, I'm locked and loaded to write that up now, and I move on. Okay, the house is quiet now. Okay, that sounds fairly kind of conversational, and I might say a lot of this poem is conversational in tone. Jim, just lie down. Lie down. Stop fussing. Sorry. House is quiet now. She knits. Now, I told you the first time, don't read as if it's the end of a sentence, but line endings are interesting. Knits falls on the end of a line. Quite like that. It's another verb. It's something that she's doing to keep herself busy, isn't it? But equally, knitting for me is about nurturing and clothing other people. It's not just about entertaining myself, keeping myself busy, keeping my brain active, but it's also about, I'm either going to clothe myself, and knitting is about knitting warm things, comforting things. So do I, as I'm reading that, do I think this old woman feels like she needs some comfort? Or do I think she kind of misses knitting for others, like little ones, babies, for example, children, sharing what she creates to clothe and feed and nurture other people? And I would also just notice a line ending. So I would just put L.E because that's my abbreviation for line ending. I'm going to mention that to the examiner. Line endings emphasize an idea. So I'm going to put that when I write it up. The line ending emphasizes a certain idea. In this case, the idea that is emphasized is the idea of knitting, which, and then I go down those avenues of what I understand about knitting and how I might be meant to be feeling about this old woman, that, you know, oh, she misses, I understand that she misses knitting for her family. Okay. Right. So there's two really nice ones there from stanza 1. And if you think about how we might write those up, they're taking up quite a nice chunk on the page. We've addressed, I've chosen some evidence. I've shared some understanding of that evidence. I have shared what I understand of the choices that the writer has made, the poet has made, that there's two dynamic verbs going on here. I've also suggested something about structure, and if you actually look at nodding, it's a line opening, L.O. Again, emphasis is placed to the words that open lines and close lines. So by looking at language, I've also looked at some structural ideas, really, really simply. Okay, and that is showing I have a nice clear understanding, not just of the words, but of other choices poets have made. That they chose to open the line there and end the line there because they wanted us to pay attention to the ideas behind the word nodding and the idea behind the word knits. So stanza 2, for me, if I was looking at this, is nice and boxed off now. I can write something about where this poem opens. Okay, it's all very domestic, isn't it? And a person from an older generation. Okay, right, so let me support you with stanza 2 now. So notice that stanza 2 is actually enjambed. It runs on as a sentence, doesn't it? This sentence started, she knits, rises to put the kettle on, watches a cowboy's killing. Now, I have marked many from this poem, responses about this poem, but please be careful. We don't want to say that this old lady, you know, maybe is a homicidal maniac who really loves watching gory killings on the TV. In my gut, I know for myself that that is not what this poet intends. Otherwise, the rest of the poem would have other supporting pieces for that. She watches it, she consumes it. Now, what I can say is that, yeah, maybe she likes watching cowboy TV, cowboy films. Do I think, though, that that phrase, watches a cowboy's killing, is important for its language choices? Well, it doesn't really jump out at me. It's conversational in tone, it's listy, isn't it? And you could say that the poet lists the things that she does on an evening. There's nothing wrong with saying that, but I don't think I'm going to get line after line of discussion out of that. So I might mention it very quickly, but I'm actually looking for something that's a little bit more poppy, sparky, ping, ping, ping on the page. Okay, so watches a cowboy's killing, reads the local births and deaths. So there's some nice things to say about that, isn't there? Again, it doesn't kind of pop at me, but if things don't start to pop, then I've got to accept that this poet is using almost, we call it being prosaic. Prose, you know what prose is. It's just, you know, where the writer starts writing at the left-hand side, moves across the page, and then down onto the next line. Novels, short stories. Prosaic, a little bit more ploddy, sometimes a little bit more conversational in tone, informative in tone. So if there's a lot of that going on, I'm going to mention it. But I feel like I dealt with the events that happened to her in my last paragraph. So for me, I'm looking for something new and fresh. Falls asleep at growing stockpiles of warheads. Now, what I like there is the fact that that is in inverted commas. It is clearly either something that she hears on the TV news, the newsreader, or she reads it as a headline in the paper. It could be either, and I'd share that with the examiner. It could either be the news broadcaster reading the headlines, or it could be that she reads a headline in the newspaper. But I'm interested in the words in there because the words, the tone of those words change. It sounds sinister, it sounds severe, okay? Growing, it's getting bigger by the minute. Stockpiles, there's already a great big stock of over there and it's growing even more. And the most alarming thing, look at the alarming thing, look at where it lands on the line. It lands on the end of the line, the warheads. Okay, now, it depends on what your general knowledge is. I know that my 12-year-old has quite an alarming vocabulary for weaponry because of the games that he plays. So some of you, just because of who you are and what you play and what you've experienced, will be very familiar with what a warhead is in your general knowledge if you've read well or you listen to the news. If you don't, it doesn't take much of a guess to guess what a warhead is, does it? The word war, we're all familiar with. Warheads are put onto the end, this is what I understand, somebody might correct me, but they're kind of the very end of missiles, they're the explosive bit. So you've got the bit that kind of projects the missile to travel across to wherever you want your bomb to hit, and on the end is the bit that is loaded with those explosives. Okay, so destruction, violence, increasing. The verb, another ing verb, great stuff. Another dynamic verb is used, growing, to suggest that this is an ever-increasing pile. The stock, the store of warheads in the world, those weapons, is growing and growing and growing. The world is therefore getting worse. Warheads falls on the end of the line and therefore further emphasises the idea that as human beings what we seem to be doing is just spending our time looking at how we can kind of train our guns on our neighbours. So I'm interested that is outside of Oak Terrace, isn't it? Oak Terrace is where she lives, but she brings the outside in through the news and through the newspapers. So actually we are getting more of a world view from this poet. So for assessment objective 2, we've got to consider what is the purpose of the poet's choices. Okay, so here, the purpose of his choices is to make the reader aware and check on the world we live in. Gosh, are we spending all our time on defences and weaponry and military and this idea of frightening people into believing they have to be protected in these ways and that other people have to be killed? It's a depressing way to look at the world, isn't it? And this poor lonely woman is looking at how the rest of the world outside of her house is more obsessed with kind of killing. Even on her telly, the cowboys killing comes through, doesn't it? So for me, the writer's purpose here is to say, whoa, have we built a bleak world for us to live in? Okay. Instead of looking after our elderly who are lonely and knitting and using the telly for company and obsessing instead with defence and spending billions on that, have we got our way of organising society all wrong? Okay, so if I'm really going for those super grades, when I look at writer's purpose, I start to see some of those things as well. Okay, so I could just have a look at it for going to stockpiles of warheads. Here's what that means. You know, that there's a lot of weaponry in the world, but equally then I could push it on to writer's purpose, as I did for you in that discussion. Okay, so I've got one that's definitely going to be something I can write about really nicely there. Okay, third stanza, what I'm going to do for you here is I'm going to tell you what I might have underlined, and I'm going to tell you what subject terms I might have used, but I'm going to allow you the space to think, well, what are the implications? Why choose that? Why position that there? What's the idea that the poet is drawing my attention to? What do I know about the world that I think the poet is also trying to remind me that I know about the world? Okay, right, so I'm interested in the fact that in stanza 3, we get, it's an enjambed line. It opens, doesn't it, with the word fades, which belongs to the sentence in the stanza before. That gives it additional emphasis because it's a line opener. And the word fades is about her falling asleep. But is it also, I'll ask the question, I'm not going to answer it, is it also about not just her fading into sleep, but is it also a metaphor for her point in life? So I might want to talk about that. She dreams of life spent in the one house. We're back to that conversational, prosaic language, aren't we? The informative language there. Colon. Heralds a list. Suffers again. I'm interested in that word, suffers, because I can explain to the examiner why that would have been chosen. What parts of this woman's emotional life and mental life are being focused on now by choosing the word suffers. Okay, and then I get the list. And I am underlining words in this list. Poverty, sickness, abandonment. There's a trio there on that line. I love the fact it's tripled, so I can share that with the examiner. I also know that each of those nouns is what is called an abstract noun. So they name things in the world, but they don't name things that we can touch. They are about abstract ideas that we have to see in action. So I can see in action poverty. I just switch TV on to see people living in poverty. During lockdown, you might have seen on the news about families accessing food banks because the wage that the family earns doesn't stretch to buying food. So we see poverty in action. We can't touch poverty, but we can see it in action. So it's an abstract noun. Okay. It happens over time. Sickness, again, we can't touch it. It happens over time. It's the idea of being ill over time, isn't it? Abandonment. Why put abandonment, the last one, on the line? Well, you know from earlier on in this video what I say about line endings, and if you know anything about the rule of 3, you will know that the poet puts the one that they want you to pay most attention to on the third beat, and there we have it. So what is it about abandonment that is sadder and harder to live with than sickness and poverty? Okay, there's what you're going to explore. And then we move on to very personal things, don't we? So I've looked at line 3, a child's death. So it does not take much being human to understand the implications of that. Parents, it is a parent's biggest fear. Okay. That sense of being robbed of a life, of it being unnatural order, that your child dies before you. So you can name the emotion words that come there. So have a think about the words that you know. So this is not just sadness, is it? What are extreme forms of sadness? What is the sadness called when we lose someone? It's not just called sadness, it's called something else. So test yourself for your vocabulary. What do you know about extreme words for sadness? Okay. If you don't have any more, then say sadness. But if you do have, for example, here's only one, devastation, then you should be using those because they name it more accurately. Okay. So there's a couple from there. And I will leave you to have a look at stanza 4 on your own. Now I've set you through how I do it. Follow the same sort of thing I do. Melting to madness. That's your clue. And then off you go with the rest of that. Okay, so what you're going to be doing now, underlining the bits of language that you do want to talk about, labelling the technique choice that the writer made. We've got loads already, so if you can't label them accurately, then leave it, because you don't have to do it absolutely every time. It's nice if you can, but you don't have to. But if you can do, and jotting down, well, as a human being, where does that take me? What does it make me feel? What does it make me realise? What does it make me understand about this poet's view of the world? Okay, right, you are good to go now on task 2 and the little cluster of things that you have to do. I will see you for the cluster of tasks for task 3 in the next video. Best of luck, get your underlining done, smashing it. While you're smashing, smash that subscribe, smash that like. All right, see you soon, bye-bye.